Welcome to my second episode, which I will talk about the 4 classical theories of truth. My experience with LQI was a first burst with Singaporean programmatism. More importantly, it was a first burst with the idea that there are different standards for truth, and that arguments that sounds reasonable given one standard might sound terrible when evaluated against a different one. This is very useful to know because if you are able to swap out different lenses for truth, it becomes easier to be a better, more rigorous thinker. If we want to understand the bar for truth that LQY was using, and if we want to use, if you want to use it for ourselves, we need to first understand the 4 classical theories of truth and the implications of each theory on the way we evaluate ideas. To do this, we have to turn to epistemology. Epistemology is the part of philosophy concerned with the forms of truth. It asks, how do we know that something is true? And what bar for truth should we use to evaluate claims? In epistemology, there are 4 common theories of truth. Of course, are filled with a name like epistemology. Sounds highfalutin and impractical, but in reality, we reach for these theories in our day-to-day lives. In order to determine what is true and what is fake, we do this even we don't know their names. Why are these 4 theories useful? They are useful because they give us a cheat sheet for critical thinking. Evaluating a claim, any claim, demands that you use some sort of standard of truth in your head. It helps a great deal if you know there are really only 4 approaches that are worth talking about. The 4 theories are also follows, like correspondence theory of truth. Correspondence theory of truth that whatever corresponds observable reality is true. The second is the coherence theory of truth. Coherence theory of truth that claims are true if they follow logically and coherently from a set of axioms or intermediate propositions. The third is the consensus theory of truth, that what is true is what everyone agrees to be true. The fourth is pragmatic theory of truth, that what is true is what is useful to you or beneficial for you. I say classical because I was taught this in university. Actually, philosophers will say that the consensus theory of truth is postmodern, not classical. They have a point, perhaps. Common is a better term. Nevertheless, I think truth by consensus is something we use on a day-to-day basis, and so deserves inclusion if you want a decision about truth to be useful. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole and cross the border from the practical to the philosophical, you may do so here and here. So far, this theory of truth might seem trite to you. Cut. Sorry. So far, these theories of truth might seem trite to you. It might not be clear how to make them actionable. So let's take a closer look. The correspondence theory of truth. The correspondence theory of truth says that what is true is what matches observable reality. The most obvious applications of this theory is in science. Whenever we conduct an experiment to verify or disprove a hypothesis, we are using the correspondence theory. For we assume that what we observe in the experiment is what is true. But correspondence is not just something that exists in science. Far away from daily life, we draw on this theory. For instance, whenever we evaluate a claim by checking against our experience, our experiences. If a friend claimed that all men are terrible at housework, for example, you will immediately evaluate that claim against that all men you have met in your life. Similarly, if you read in a blog post that action produces information, you will compare the examples in that post against your past and then evaluate it according to how convincingly those claims line up with your life experiences. One way to do this is to generate counter examples while reading. If an author makes a point synthesized from her experiences, then you should attempt to generate as many counter examples as possible from your experiences or from real world scenarios that you have read about. The more counter examples you are able to generate, the less highly you should think of the author's thinking, and the less credible you should find the entire piece. Now we shall look at the second example, which is the coherence theory of truth. The coherence theory of truth is the idea that arguments must make sense. That is, arguments must flow logically from premises and intermediate propositions. This is where the notions of fallacy comes from. If you make a fallacious argument, you are violating the rules of logic, and therefore your argument be rejected as false. I think coherence is what many thinkers fall back on. After correspondence, whenever you see commenter pointing out, oh, that's a fallacious argument, they are drawing on to coherence theory in order to reject an argument or claim out of hand. Both correspondence, this does not line up with my experiences, and coherence, this is not a watertight argument. Are the two most common standards for truth I have seen used in the world. The third consensus theory of truth. The consensus theory of truth says that what is true is what everyone agrees to be true. This sounds bizarrely idiotic on the face of it, like some childish standards of truth, constructed for simpler ideas in simpler times, and yet many aspects of human knowledge depends on consensus to work. For instance, when I say that I wear a mask to prevent the spread of COVID-19, how do I know this? Have I observed it in reality? or in correspondence, did some make a compelling and plausible argument to me? The answer is no to both, although there have been many compelling arguments for and against mask wearing in the month. Nadanya sudah salah. Compelling arguments for and against mask wearing in the month since the pandemic began. Instead, what has happened is that scientists seem to have come to some consensus that mask wearing is a good idea, even ahead of proper randomized control trials, and I believe in the consensus of experts. So therefore, I wear a mask. Now, for example of the pragmatic theory of truth. The pragmatic theory of truth is, to me, the most interesting theory of truth. It is also the most counterintuitive, so I will spend more time on it. The pragmatic theory of truth is the view that whatever is useful to you or beneficial for you is true. This approach stems from the tendency of early pragmatic philosophers to evaluate ideas for ends, not means. Pragmatism is most concerned with practical consequences, not theoretical ones. It is the practitioner epistemology. As a trivial example, if you find that believing in a religion helps you to become a better, more effective person, then it is perfectly acceptable. From the pragmatist perspective, to take up religion and believe in it as truth. In other words, if it works for you, why not? The question, is it true, can often be substituted with does it work, or is it useful with regard to my goals? Pragmatist is counter intuitive in other subtle ways. For instance, the question, is it true, can often be substituted with does it work, or is it useful with regard to my goals? This is a very different bar for truth compared to previous three theories. Often the pragmatic theory of truth is concerned with instrumental result. It is less interested in the specifics of why something works. This idea might seem strange to you. It certainly seemed bizarre to me when I first learned about it, but it is not so surprising to the average Singaporean, because pragmatism lies at the core of the country's identity. Fortunately, like the other theories of truth, many of us use pragmatism without knowing it. For instance, when we are learning to cook, we don't necessarily have to study the minutiae food science in order to grok how to use a particular ingredient in some recipe. We use it, taste it, and if it works, we accept it, and then we move on. A sharp observer would say that if we dug deeper to understand the chemical interactions at play with that ingredient, we would be able to come up with better, more innovative recipes. And while this may be true, it doesn't detract from the broader idea that asking, is this useful, is a different bar for truth than is this true, and that both standards for truth have their place in the world. If for instance, we only use things that we fully understood, we will never use paracetamol for treating fever, because paracetamol's mechanism of action remains unknown.